Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On this week's docket, Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz in boxing. It finally went down in the Big D. Cory Sandhagen, he won his fight, but did he win over the crowd? And Tatiana Suarez returns to strawweight. Folks, she's a problem. All this and much, much more. Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Gorgeous George, and with me, as always, some of the sharpest MMA minds in the biz. Joining me this week, our international superstar reporter, Farah Hanoun, is back. The Boston shot caller, Nolan King, he's also in the house. And, of course, the return of the MMA media titan, Mike Bond. He's with us. Goes is on the ones and twos this week. Let's get to it. Jake Paul defeated Nate Diaz via unanimous decision after 10 rounds of boxing and some fooling about, but mostly boxing. The house was packed. The gate was 3 M's plus, and not a bad night for these two combat sports superstars overall. Remember, they were also promoters here. Mike, you were there live in the house. You're going to lead off with the first take. Bring it, baby.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the big positive here is we could be sitting here on this Monday having a much sadder conversation when it comes to Nate Diaz. I think he didn't have too bad of an account of himself. I think a lot of us coming in thought this might end ugly for him, and it seemed like in that first round certainly wasn't the best start for him. He gets knocked down in the fifth, and you're just like, oh no, is this gonna be that kind of night? Didn't end up really being. He came back, had his moments, I'm sure we'll talk about like the late guillotine attempt and all that stuff. He made it fun at least, did that thing where he loses the fight, but I think still comes out smelling like flowers to a degree. So I don't think all in all a bad night on the Nate Diaz side. And then if you're Jake Paul, rebounds from his first loss, right? I think he showed improvement from what we've seen out of him in previous fights, arguably his most complete and best boxing performance. You can say whatever you want about how maybe the opponent is related to that. Once again, an older, aging MMA fighter and not a person who came from a professional boxing upbringing. So, of course, there's the same old criticisms to be had about Jake Paul as there probably could be for a long time now if you're one of the people who dislikes the opponent selection for him. But this felt like a big event, man. When I was there, the crowd was unreal. There was a lot of good energy in there. The undercard was pretty underwhelming, but I think these two overall saved the day and made it a fun night at the end of it. So, it felt like a strong event watching from ringside. I'd be curious to know how everyone kind of felt like watching from home, because obviously there's a UFC event going on as well. Worked out well for them, and the fact that Cory Sandhagen's fight ended right before the main event started. So all in all, I think a good night for combat sports, but being there on the ground in Dallas, it felt like a big deal.
All right, so Mike, your last MMA pay-per-view was, I should say UFC, was Utah, right?
Yeah, just the week prior.
So compare the atmosphere there to that event. Not fight night, obviously, because A, you can't be in two places at once. Right. And I think it's more comparable to go boxing fight night versus the pay-per-view. So since it was the most recent, what was the vibe like, all that stuff?
Definitely a different type of crowd, right? At the Jake Paul fight, you have pretty much everything you could imagine. You have little kids there with their parents. You have, girls there dressed up to the nines and the nice dresses and stuff. And it's just kind of a very much mixed blend of all sorts of people. You had, Nate Diaz had a lot of support there. You could definitely tell like the California crew came out. So there was like some people there that maybe you could describe as slightly sketchy characters, being like, if something pops off here, like it could get ugly in this arena. Thankfully, nothing crazy happened. I think the worst we got was maybe a little brawl in the hallway after the event between some fans. That video is being kind of circulating around. But the UFC crowd was more or less typical, I guess. But how could that not be a hot crowd, right? Like that UFC 291 card was absolutely unreal from top to bottom, had some incredible finishes and stuff. So the energy from that one was great from start to finish. The boxing fight was, like I said, kind of underwhelming. The undercard fights up until the main event. Ashton Silva had a nice knockout to open the official main card. Some prelims got bumped up, but yeah, that was more or less the highlight until we got to Jake Paul and Nate Diaz.
Yeah, the main event is where it's all at in boxing. All right, so Farah Hanoun, you're next. What did you think of this event? I don't even think I need to ask for your guys' scores. I think everybody kind of had Jake Paul winning, but how did Nate Diaz come off to you? How did the event come off to you?
It was fun. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the fight. I thought, the biggest win for Jake Paul is probably knocking Nate Diaz down. I thought he was going to win by decision. Didn't expect him to knock him down. So I was impressed by that. But it was fun. I mean, typical Nate Diaz antics. He came on strong towards the end, finished it off with his guillotine, putting his arms up. It was fun. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good rebound for Jake Paul because obviously coming off of the Tommy Fury loss,
True.
the first real boxer that he fights. But then again, at least Nate Diaz was one of those MMA guys that boxes. He's known for his boxing in MMA. So at least it was that, not so much like a Ben Askren where people were kind of completely critiquing the matchup itself. But so yeah, I thought it was fun. Diaz had his moments towards the end. My only issue is sometimes when these MMA guys, I don't know where to point in terms of Diaz's career. I think it's fair to say it could be the latter part of his career. He seems, to be talking about a return to UFC, talking about MMA with Jake Paul. I know we'll get to that later. But it kind of does hurt your stock a little bit sometimes when you do those fights. Because when I think of Nate Diaz, if he were to return to the UFC, we're thinking what potentially Dustin Poirier and stuff. And then after that fight with Jake Paul getting knocked down in round 5, I feel like in a way your stock almost drops. And again, we'll get into that a little bit more later on. But overall, I enjoyed it. I thought Diaz, came on strong later. That kind of saved his performance a little bit. Knockdown didn't help at all, but overall, Jake Paul looked solid, and I was entertained, so I liked it.
And even Nate's last fight in the UFC versus Ferguson, it wasn't really a banger per se. But yeah, because what awaits Nate apparently is, or we would think, the big fight is Conor McGregor, who we'll get to in a second. But he's yet to even enter the USADA pool. I don't know how many times I said that. All right, how about Nolan? Let's go to you. Your take on the fight, the event, man. What do you think? Do you even want to see them run it back? There's, like Fada said, there's so many options for all these guys.
No, I don't have any interest in a rematch, but I think that was fun for what it was, right? I mean, we saw all week there were a lot of people that seemed to not necessarily like the idea that this was being involved in our coverage, and there was a lot of trash talk about that. But to me, man, I don't understand why this product can't coexist with everything else we've got going on. I mean, obviously there is an audience for it. Just watching that moment, I felt that it was a lot of fun. I'm not a guy that necessarily delves into the influencer boxing game by any means, but it was cool. I mean, it is what it is. I don't think anybody is sitting here saying like that's the greatest boxing match we've ever seen, or either of these guys are necessarily particularly fantastic at boxing, but I think it was fun for what it was. I think that fight week seemed to take it from a level that, in terms of interest in it, that like when we entered the week, I was like, man, this is this week. I feel like nobody's talking about it. And then as it went on, it seemed like they did, whatever happened. I don't know if it was maybe the press conference thing where there was the shoving between security guards, or just maybe people's general recognition that like, oh, this is happening this weekend. But it seemed like their ticket sales went way up. It seemed, excuse me, that people in general were talking about it a lot more, and it just felt like a bigger event once it got there. So like Mike said, the crowd was great. Excuse me. It just seemed like a big event. So I was pretty happy with it. I was pretty entertained by it. And but I just don't have any interest in a rematch, man. That was pretty one-sided. I don't really know what else is out there for Jake Paul from here on out. Maybe that's something we'll touch on in a minute, but I think for what it was a fun moment in time, and I think it should be respected for that.
Nolan, to be exact here, you don't want to see them rematch in boxing. What about this whole deal about he'll come over to MMA, 10 million, whether it's in the PFL, whether it's PFL and Real co-promoting? We know Jake's not going to go to the UFC, or at least I don't think that's even possible. But what do you think in MMA?
The appeal is really not there as much as it is. I know everybody always says, well, the boxers never come over to MMA. To me, it's that is not as appealing to me. Like, I would watch it. I think it would be obviously entertaining for different reasons, for kind of the wrong reasons, because I just think it would be way more lopsided than it would be the other Nate going to boxing. Like, I think when you have a guy that's done decades worth of jiu-jitsu and has the submission skills, I mean, it really only takes one takedown. We've seen a couple times where boxers have come over to MMA on the lower levels and it hasn't ended up well for them, except for Ray Mercer, who knocked out Tim Sylvia. So I guess there is always that puncher's chance, but yeah, man, I don't really have that much interest in that. I think there's things I'd rather see Diaz do from here on out. I mean, since I've worked here, we've talked about the Conor McGregor trilogy. So that's something that I still feel like needs to happen. And then also just, I think the fact that he is interested in going back to the UFC, like does he really want to go to PFL and do this? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to get a gauge with him, but I'm not really interested in the rematch, to be honest with you, in any combat sport.
All right, Fada, you want to weigh in?
Yeah, because I was talking about the whole Diaz's stock potentially dropping a little bit. I think I saw some odds floating around where he was a minus 1,200 favorite, and you would think before this boxing match he would have been a much larger favorite, considering that Jake Paul has never done MMA. So that was kind of the point that I was getting at. I would have, we've seen larger favorites in MMA fights from top contenders fighting champions, and Diaz being a minus 1,200 favorite over Jake Paul, I expected it to be much, much larger. But I think people are looking at the boxing match and thinking that they could see something out of Jake Paul, that we don't know anything of what he would look like in an MMA cage, considering obviously he's never competed in MMA. So that was kind of where I was getting at with his stock dropping a little bit, because minus 1,200, I expected the odds to be way, way bigger than that. But it seems like, right after the boxing match, people seem to think Jake has a chance against Diaz. At least those odds are not the odds we'd usually see over a seasoned MMA guy like Nate Diaz, a former title challenger, versus a guy who's never competed in MMA.
Did they not see the street fight in New Orleans? Because I think it would go like that personally, but
maybe he just found guilty. And I don't know. Am I the only one who's excited, I guess, for the potential of that? I'm not convinced that Nate Diaz would try to take him down or submit him. I feel like he would almost try to stand with him in MMA and prove a point. And maybe, the knees and the kicks and the clinch work and the pushing against the fence without being separated might be enough for him to win a fight without doing that. But I mean, it's not like Nate Diaz has the greatest takedown game in the world. I guess he could pull guard or something, but if Jake Paul, he did wrestle a little bit in high school, if he dedicated himself to 6 months of sprawl training, as they used to say for anyone who came over, maybe he could do enough against Nate to make it competitive, and maybe Nate would be willing to stand up, because that's how he'd like to prove a point and win, and maybe say, I can beat you in stand up in MMA like you beat me in stand up in boxing. I don't know. I feel like it's maybe more competitive. It just depends on how goofy Jake Paul might look out there trying to throw kicks and stuff, or what his stand up would look like in an MMA fight.
See, if this fight happens, and go for it, Farrah.
No, go for it. I was just going to say, do you guys think minus 1,200 is fair? Like, is that how you would put it? Like the odds?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. That seems okay to me. Like, it's hard to tell with Nate at this point, right? And who knows? An MMA fight, he gets cut up. There's a chance of like a cut stoppage, things like that. Who knows with him? That seems appropriate to me. I guess you could do it higher, and maybe it gets bet up higher if that's actually the line, but it doesn't seem outrageous.
Yeah, for me, once you start getting in odds that are so lopsided, I feel like I don't even know what the difference between a 20-1 favorite or a 24-1 favorite is. You know what I mean? It's so unlikely to happen that I think, I mean, honestly, I would probably even have it bigger, I guess, if I had to choose. But I don't know. See, here's the thing, right? Mike just said that. If he's right, he's got his clip. If this fight happens and Jake Paul wins, he's got his clip. But if it doesn't happen, nobody's going to remember they just said that. So, except me. I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to find this.
It's funny because as Mike was talking, I remember what I was feeling on Saturday night. Under the influence of Modelo's, I get it. But still, I was on the edge of my seat. Like, first of all, I was expecting this fight to play out, right? I knew that Jake Paul would be tough early on and Nate, later as it went. Yeah. But all of a sudden, Jake Paul really hurt this guy, in round one, he's coming after him. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be embarrassing for us MMA guys, because I thought he would last a little longer. And then Nate weathers that storm. And then I keep thinking, okay, start to turn it on. And then he gets knocked down. I'm like, holy cow, what is going on here? And then, of course, those other rounds. See, I thought it was closer than whatever it was, 99, 92 or whatever. I thought it was a little closer. I thought Nate was kind of taking off the beginning of the rounds, like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all those. And then coming on so strong that you felt like if he had just done that 30 seconds or 45 seconds earlier in the round, instead of waiting to halfway, he maybe could put Jake Paul away, because Jake Paul was kind of like, on his heels and going backwards. I don't know. I had a buddy that was watching with me, and he goes, this is garbage boxing. I'm like, stop focusing on that. No one's trying to compare this to Crawford and Spence, right? What we're saying, though, is if you pick two personalities that you want to see fight and someone's got to eat crow and someone gets all the roses, that's interesting. And so that's how I felt about it. So the rematch, part of me wants to see him come over because, yeah, I'd like to see MMA guys win fights because I think we have the baddest athletes in the world. And unfortunately, we always have to take our beatings in boxing. So part of me does want to see it. The only problem is I just don't know if it'll have that big spotlight that it would, obviously, under the UFC banner. And we know that can happen. Mike, let me ask you this. Let me take you through fight week. Was it like Nolan said, where this thing snuck up on us? It kind of did seem a little dead. And then all of a sudden, that shoving, the pushing around on stage seemed to really, really take it to that level of what we felt like it should be. Is that kind of how you felt the vibe over there as well? I should stop
Yeah,
using the word vibe. That one's getting old.
for sure. It was a little dull leading up to that point, but I think we all knew on the ground there, like at some point, something is going to pop off here and something's going to happen. We just didn't know what it would look like, who would be in between. Like, dude, Nate Diaz had like 80 people there with him. He had so many people in the hotel. They had an Airbnb that like all the boys were there. I spoke with his manager, Zach Rosenfield, and he's like, man, we're probably not going to see that Airbnb damage deposit back that we put down, right? Like they just knew they were rolling deep and it was going to be chaotic. And Jake Paul, as always, had a huge crew as well. So you had a feeling something was going to happen eventually. And you could see how happy Jake Paul was on the stage when that little press conference scuffle happened. He was just like, finally, like a gift from the gods here. And it kind of took it a little bit over the edge. And then I thought their final face-off at the public ceremonial weigh-ins, whatever you want to call it. They don't like that you call it ceremonial weigh-ins in boxing. They want it to be called the public weigh-in. But anyways, I thought that face-off was great between them. Chael Sonnen appears. Nate throws the little kick. And I think that really just kind of elevated it a bit there. So, yeah, it was a bit of a slow start. And it's hard, as you say, like you have Crawford Spence the week before. You have that huge UFC pay-per-view. It's hard to kind of etch your spot in this combat sport space out now just because there's everything happening every single weekend. And it did sneak up on us a little bit. But I think by the time it arrived, it was good. ESPN Plus jumping on board as a pay-per-view distributor at like the 11th hour a little bit was a big deal. They promoted this thing 10 times what DAZN did. It felt like, at one point, like Mark Raimondi, our colleague from ESPN, it was just going to be him there covering the event. And then when ESPN Plus picked it up, they send out, cameramen and all that stuff to make their coverage even more thorough. So by the time we arrived there, it did feel like a big deal to me.
Okay. A few other things here. But first of all, shout out to Taupa from New Zealand tuning in. And yes, folks, we did go an hour early, not just this week, but for the next couple months, we're going to do an 11 a.m. Eastern start time, 8 a.m. Pacific to accommodate the Dana White Contender Series weigh-ins. We'll throw it to that as this show's ending. It's an hour show every Monday. So welcome to those of you that maybe caught this early. And, hey, leave a like and a subscribe so that you can be reminded of when we're on. I think you hit that little bell and boom, it tells you when this channel is on live. And trust me, folks, we have a lot of great content. Again, following us after this will be the Dana White Contender Series. But them likes are the key. So please hit that for us. And I'm going to try and get to some of these comments and questions. A shout out to Chill Winston. Benyam Gretschall or something like that says, what are the odds each of you would put on an MMA fight between Jake and Diaz? You might have missed it, Benyam, but Afada said, Potter, you said you saw an official minus 1,200. Was that a?
I saw that floating around, and shout out to him. He kind of kickstarted that conversation, okay. So he put that comment like that's why I brought it up. But yeah, I saw that floating around quite a bit. I'm not sure who it came from, but it was the same odds that I kept seeing around those minus 1,200. That could have changed, but yeah, I mean, like I said, it's because it's coming right off the boxing match. I think they would have been a lot different before they boxed, but maybe a bit of recency bias. But hey. There's the big question mark and the unknown with Jake Paul. I know he does have a bit of a wrestling background, but the cardio, he looked like he was starting to slow down towards the end. And MMA, you've got clinch, you've got grappling. It's a whole different ball game. So,
but Diaz is so stubborn, man. And the longer you throw with 4-ounce gloves, you just never know. And because I think that's what Tim Sylvia was thinking. As this fight plays out, I'm going to catch Ray Mercer with something, that he's not used to. And the thing was over like in 16 seconds. Chill Winston says, I thought Jake Paul made huge improvements from the Tommy Fury fight. He looked powerful and accurate. Would love to hear how much you guys think he improved in such a short time. Anybody want to weigh in on that one? Has anybody been tracking Jake Paul's boxing career? I have, but you guys are the stars.
I think he improved. I kind of said it earlier, right? I thought he was a better version of himself. He changed a lot of things within his training and his camp. And you heard at the press conference after, Nikisa Badarian, his advisor / business partner, said that they think the loss to Tommy was like the best thing that could have happened to him, because they would have just kept going with their same routines, same people, all that stuff. So he kind of made the adjustments. I know it's like corny and a little bit cheesy to be like, you learn more from losses than wins in combat sports, but it seems to be the case for Jake Paul. We got to kind of put it in context, right? He's only been boxing for like 4 years at this point. And one thing, you can dislike him as a person, his antics, that stuff, and the other, he does treat his preparation for the sport with respect. He spends the money, does it the right way, takes it seriously, brings in serious people. So that's one thing you can't necessarily knock him for. Does that mean he's going to become good enough that he can beat Canelo by 2026, as he predicted? Like, no, I don't think that's ever going to happen. But for who he is, like a novice boxer, I think you got to respect his improvement and the gains he's made in the time he's spent here.
All that perfectly said. Yes, I heard that Canelo thing. I think I spit my drink out. He needs to cool it with that. Everything else, I applaud him, man. YouTube star. Yes, him and his brother wrestled when they were younger. Great athletes. They do definitely surround themselves with the right people in this sport. I have respect for what they've done here. They make a ton of money, all that. But man, come on, stop with the Canelo stuff.
Well, if you don't like Jake Paul, you should absolutely want to see that fight, because he would get destroyed. So you should be hoping that happens.
True, but I don't even need to see it. I just pictured it right now, and that gave me the satisfaction. I mean, it's just, I don't know, whatever. He's the guy we're talking about. Well, that's fine. Big Ben 13 asking where Danny's at. We rotate the staff, man. We got a talented staff here, Big Ben, but he's been on the last few weeks. You'll catch him soon. He says Nate's smacking style didn't sit well with the boxing gloves on. Guys, could Nate have won this? Did it almost seem like once again, had he prepared a little bit more, taken it more serious, he could have won this? Even Nick was saying the same thing when he was talking to, I think it was the Zone Group or whoever was covering this. That's what kind of sucks for me, man. Is like he comes up short in these big fights, and yes, he rolls out with more fans. He still makes a lot of money, but I think he could have been a bigger star and had a lot more money if he had just won a couple key fights.
Yeah, and I mean, he talked about it afterwards too, saying that he had an injury to his arm. So I'm not sure how much of a Diazism that is versus a reality or whatever. Again, tough guy to figure out. I think everybody involved kind of comes to that conclusion. But for me, I think Nate's age too. Like, I think there's a lot of different things when you look at him when he gets in there. Because I mean, to be honest, we don't see him that frequently either. Like seeing him once a year, and you kind of think like what Nate looked like the last time, and you try to compress the 3 fights together as if he was a guy that fought every 2 months. Like, I think age can catch up to him too. He's 38 now. His cardio obviously still hanging in there. I'm assuming he still does his triathlons and stuff like that. I just think that sure, he could have come in and looked a little bit sharper, but he's also boxing and he's not a boxer. So it's a lot going on there, right?
Mm-hmm. All right, guys. One last thing here, and then we'll move on. What really is next for Diaz? What really you guys think happens here? Does he just go back to MMA, sign with the UFC? He tickled, that little itch he had for boxing, made some money, and that's it? Or what do you think? Because you're right. Father Time is going to catch up to him pretty soon if it hasn't already. What do you guys think you see him next? We'll go really quick around the horn, Mike Bond.
I don't know. I think there's a decent chance we get this rematch in MMA. Like, I think it is possible. Jake Paul seemed to be taking it seriously. He said he wants to make this happen. He's under contract with PFL. If he plans on actually doing that, this seems like a pretty good fit for him. And Nate made it pretty clear, I think, at the press conference. He said, getting this rematch is all that matters to me at this point. And you wonder what the UFC's interest level is in him at this point. If this, as far alluded to earlier, like damaged his value at all in their eyes. I mean, I can't imagine they're offering him the exact same money to fight whomever is maybe they did before this loss. I don't know. Maybe there's a way to prove he's an even bigger draw after this. I can't say for sure, but yeah, it's tough. I think there is options for him, but I feel like he's going to want that Jake Paul fight back in some facet again. And I think they'll see the business that they did together on Saturday, and it'll make sense for everyone involved.
Mike, you think PFL has to co-promote? Will Nate actually don the PFL gear and be an official PFL fighter, you think? Because he seems like he retains some loyalty to the UFC. So how does this happen if it happens with the PFL involved somehow, or does it?
I'm sure, have to be a co-promotion of some kind. What that would look like, I don't know. Whether it's just like, something on the branding, PFL and Real Fighting present, this fight, this event. If he has a patch on his shorts, whatever, stuff on the cage. There's ways you can do this, and I think PFL would be very open to doing something like this, because why wouldn't they? I mean, they're desperate for a fight of this magnitude. They should move mountains and do whatever they need if they could get a Nate Diaz fight under their banner in their pay-per-view division or whatever. Like, this would be huge. If you get this fight, maybe Francis Ngannou's debut on the same card, Kayla Harrison, I don't know how that would work if they're splitting revenue between all these different people as they claim with their pay-per-view things, but you can figure that stuff out later. They should do everything they can to make this happen, no matter what compromises they'd have to make for Nate.
All right, Fada, where do you want to see Nate Diaz next? You determine his career. Let's see.
Well, that's the thing, because what's on the table for him if he were to go back to the UFC? You've got Dustin Poirier or potentially Conor McGregor, who's not back in the USADA testing pool, who we don't know if he's going to fight Michael Chandler. We don't know what he's going to do. I don't know. Like I said, after this Jake Paul, I mean, Dustin Poirier is coming off of a loss, but he looked decent. He looked good. It's not like I felt like Dustin Poirier looked like a different version of himself. He's still Dustin Poirier. He's still a guy that was on the cusp of a title fight. How intrigued would people be to see Poirier versus Diaz after we saw Diaz, box Jake Paul? So I don't know. I mean, like Mike was saying, I don't see that being the worst path in the world. It's just the only complication is he seems to be loyal to the UFC, and obviously, UFC are known not to co-promote, so they would just have to figure that part out. But maybe it's not the worst thing in the world for him to look at a Jake Paul rematch. I don't want to really see it in boxing. I don't know if that's the direction they go, but in MMA, if it were to be possible, I think that would pique my interest probably more than a Dustin Poirier fight. But Conor McGregor trilogy, yes, I'd want to see that, because we forget, Conor's coming off of that injury. Anderson Silva was never the same when he came back from that injury. Chris Weidman we're about to see on August 19th, so we don't even know what version of Conor we're getting. So I'd be interested in a Conor-Nate trilogy, but with all the question marks around Conor McGregor, maybe Dustin Poirier would be more on the table for him with a UFC return, and I don't know how much I want to see that fight after watching him box Jake Paul. So why not Jake Paul in MMA?
All right, I think these two covered it enough, Nolan. I won't throw that on you. But if you have something to share, go ahead. But I want to throw something at you. It got kind of ugly on social media afterwards with what Conor McSwaggerjacker always chiming in when there's a big fight. First he kind of went after Diaz, kind of critiquing, that whole point and move, and this is what I would do. And then, of course, Jake Paul comes in, he gets involved, and he's obviously telling Conor, clean your act up. Conor's opining on his act, which I don't even want to say what he said. But what did you think of all the fallout on Saturday night?
Very typical. I think overall, not surprising. I think Conor McGregor needs to insert himself into a lot of conversations that go on, or he takes it upon himself to do so. I don't know how much he needs to, but I mean, it's a Diaz fight. He has history with Diaz. McGregor likes to go on Twitter, say outrageous things, it seems like, in the moment. We've seen him even do it with people that he has no involvement with at all. So very not surprised, considering both of his histories with Jake Paul through the media and with Nate Diaz in their two fights and everything that they've been through. So not surprised. I mean, again, I'm sure we'll be here 2 years from now talking about a trilogy again, but it seems like it's something that Diaz is open to in the future. It seems like something the UFC is open to in the future, and it seems like something Conor's open to in the future. So, and I think, honestly, all of us would be excited to see it. So hopefully it happens. As far as the Conor trash talk goes, I mean, not surprised.
Mm-hmm. This has been a long topic. I'll give you guys a final chance. You want to weigh in on Conor and Jake Paul's little battle there on social media?
I'm less interested in the Jake Paul Conor stuff and just Conor's comments on Nate Diaz, right? He was very critical, but basically saying, like, you kind of hinted towards earlier, George, like with the antics and the walking away. He said you're pointing, like you could have beat Leon Edwards more or less, but you decided to mess around. Like, is there validity to that stuff? Obviously that's what Nate Diaz is beloved for, is these moments that he provides. But if he fought differently, if he had maybe his head in the game a little more, could he be winning more fights? Is this the best he can do with his style, right? Like, he probably knows himself better than anyone else, right? And what he's capable of in there. So is it fair? Is it unfair? I did think that was at least a semi-interesting and somewhat fair take by Conor to a degree. If you kind of look at him, because he's probably like, damn, man, like if you had beat Jake Paul, which maybe he watched that fight and thought there was an avenue for Nate, how much bigger does that make our trilogy? And now, like, you keep losing, does the UFC even want you back to the same degree? Is it going to be a struggle with the negotiation? I'm sure he's thinking of all these things, and I'm sure there's more difficulties at this point trying to get Conor into a fight that there would be Nate Diaz. But yeah, I thought that was at least, maybe not the correct messenger, but the message was intriguing. I thought, at least, it made me think.
Yeah. All right, guys. Good stuff here. Lots to unpack. We got to it all. We got to move on. Cory Sandhagen defeated Rob Font in the main event at UFC on ESPN 50. Sandhagen was dominant, and in his eyes, he solidified a title shot versus the winner of Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley later this month at UFC 292. Only thing is, the crowd was booing throughout the fight, and allegedly the UFC president, Dana White, he even walked out, I guess, during this fight. Two big factors. Wada, lots to unpack here as well. Maybe not as much as we did in this last one because it's only an hour show, but give me your thoughts here on Sandhagen's performance and everything revolving around the booing.
Yeah, obviously not the most entertaining fight in the world. But listen, I mean, Cory, if you look at his UFC losses, 2 of them have come to TJ Dillashaw, a fight that he felt like he won, and a fight that Dillashaw won by control, and a quick submission loss to Aljamain Sterling, which are 2 things where there were a bit of deficiencies in his grappling. So that's a part of his game that he feels like he needed to work on to be a world champion. This guy's obsessed with being a world champion, as he should be, and he has the tools to do so. So for him, it's a part of his game, and we've seen him work with Ryan Hall a lot. So it's obviously a part of his game, the grappling, the jiu-jitsu that he's worked on a lot. And he just, Rob Font was an opponent switch. He was preparing for Omar Nurmagomedov, which was going to be a lot of defensive grappling. And then he gets a guy who's a striker. And I know stylistically, you look at the fight and people expected, all right, we're going to get a stand-up war. But he saw a hole in Rob Font's game that he felt like he could exploit, and it worked. So to him, it was probably like a great night in the office, except the injury, which sucks for him because he just revealed that he tore his tricep. He said he was dealing with something in training camp, so that could have played a part. He received a lot of criticism from Aljamain Sterling, wasn't impressed. Henry Cejudo, they said, he wasn't active at all from top. So listen, he did what he needed to do. It was a dominant win. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. Like I said, I mean, the 3 losses, the third one to Peter Yan, he was up 2 rounds, but he, ended up getting rocked and losing that fight on the feet. But the other 2 losses, Sterling and TJ Dillashaw, was a controlled grappling thing, and it's a part of his game that he's worked on, and he's happy with his performance. Now, Aljamain Sterling, when he spoke to ESPN after and was talking about, he said this win doesn't move Cory Sandhagen forward, but he said maybe Cory can fight Merab for the vacant belt. So listen, Aljamain may not even be the champion. He might, if win or lose against Sean O'Malley, he might not be the guy who's holding the title. So no, not necessarily does Cory Sandhagen get pushed to the side, because now it's kind of a 3-man race between Cejudo, Merab, who will enter the discussion once Sterling is either not champion or gone from the division, and Cory. So I think people will get over it eventually. Yes, it wasn't entertaining, but no, I don't necessarily think that Cory's out of the title picture because it was a lackluster performance. Because like I said, we don't even know what's happening with Sterling. We may not even have a champion after a month.
Okay, good stuff there. All right, Nolan, how about you with Sandhagen, man? He's a great fighter. No one's denying that. Does he kind of just get a pass? I guess we could say he was strategic. He was smart. He came out unscathed. I mean, minus the injury on the tricep that he mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, he's provided us with so many entertaining moments up until this that in terms of like my feelings towards him, I think he certainly gets a pass. I'm not going to sit here and say that was a fun fight or a great a great showing by any means. He was super dominant though, and that's the name of the game. It wasn't a great showing in terms of trying to build his stock. It was a great showing in terms of dominance, and he went in there against a guy who's very tough, top 10 perennial contender in Rob Font, and he dominated from bell to bell. So in that regard, he did what he was supposed to do. On the flip side, we know how the UFC runs things. We know what they're looking for, and if UFC president Dana White did get up and leave during the 4th round, and that was out of spite, that is certainly not a good sign for Cory Sandhagen going forward. You know, I tweeted on Fight Night that I think Merab was kind of the biggest winner in this whole thing. I mean, if Sean O'Malley wins against Aljamain Sterling, I think Merab is going to be the guy. Whereas before, say like Sandhagen had gone out and knocked out Font, then there maybe would be that discussion of which guy should get it. Now, like Farris said, if Aljamain does vacate, you're going to have two people for that vacant belt. And so Merab versus Cory seems like it would make a lot of sense to me. That would be the fight. So maybe he will luck into a title shot in that regard. But honestly, I think it's a fight that once people see Cory get back into the cage and fight again and goes back to his usual, you know, fun sort of striking style with some fun knockouts and stuff, people have short memories. It's always about what you did for me lately. And unfortunately for Cory Sandhagen, what he did recently is not very exciting, and it was boring, and people booed, and Dana might have left or whatever. So that's the memory people have now, but it will be erased. I think Cory's not a guy that's going to go down this path of all of a sudden being, you know, a guy that's just a wet blanket. I don't think so. In the short term, probably damaging to a certain degree. Long term, I think he doesn't have anything to worry about.
Anthony Hernandez in the chat. He says he walked out of the arena. He was in Nashville. He's coming from Facebook. So is Mikkel Odinger. You can Facebook people. We've been doing our thing on Facebook as well. Feel free to leave a comment or a question. West Coast says Merab is number one. WSH RB says give him to Merab as well. Mike, what are your thoughts on the main event in Nashville?
Yeah, obviously not the most exciting performance, but I'm kind of with both the other two panelists here. You got to give him a little bit of a mulligan here. If he tore his tricep in the first round, it's even more impressive to beat Rob Font with essentially one arm, right? Like, that's not easy to do. He took the path of least resistance. Where's the criticism from Rob Font for not being able to get up off his back, right? Like, he deserves just as much as Cory Sandhagen. You take the guy down. If he's letting you stay there and you have a referee that's willing to let that play out, that's the way the fight's going to be. Cory doesn't need to take any unnecessary risks. The only reason they had a main event here is because, you know, Rob Font stepped up and Cory also agreed to take the change of opponents. So you want to give the guys a little bit of a break here, cut them some slack. I don't think it's a great look if Dana White did get up and leave. The last time I remember him doing that mid-fight was, I think, the first UFC event I ever covered as media, UFC 149, when he pieced out in the middle of Hector Lombard and Tim Boach, which was an awful fight back then too. And there was obviously a lot of hype around Hector Lombard's debut, and it was a flat fight. But yeah, I mean, just stick by your guys. It's a few more minutes to just go there, and you know, you could have come to the press conference and maybe talk Cory up a little bit for winning a fight in that dominant fashion, but it is what it is in this regard. The bantamweight title picture is very complicated. We don't know anything for sure in a couple of weeks, and I think, as Nolan kind of said there, if there is a vacant title and you match up Cory with Merab, I think people are going to get excited for it. So people have short memories in the sport. It's disappointed. I understand your frustration if you were in the Bridgestone Arena and you paid money for those tickets, that's how the night ended for you, especially because it wasn't maybe the most spectacular card overall. And historically, each of the previous 5 main events in Nashville have delivered when they've been there, and that didn't follow up to it. So it's just one of those unfortunate things, but I can't really flack on Cory Sandhagen too hard for beating a guy like Rob Font with one arm.
Good stuff, guys. Pro Fights Info in the chat says people are crying about the fights aren't real fans. Sandhagen had to do what he had to do to get 2 paychecks and a W. End of story. People should be more angry at Rob Font for not being able to get up. Kind of what Mike Bond said. CY Stevie in the chat says Cory's last 3 wins are more impressive than Merab's 3 wins. I'd have to think about it to say. Vada, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, his second comment, he said people forget how absolutely boring Merab versus Aldo is. There you go. We talked about, you know, it's kind of like an in the moment type of reaction. Yeah, that was not the most entertaining fight, but we all think that Merab is legit and he deserves to be in the title picture. So there you go. It's not always going to be the most entertaining showing, and Sandhagen has given us so many entertaining fights. So I think we can let him off the hook for this one.
Yeah. And I don't think any of us are going to sit here and defend and say, you know, that the fans should have got up and given Cory a standing ovation after that fight. But there has to be a certain amount of respect that comes with seeing a guy just dominate, you know, another fighter in the division who's in the top 10. So kind of 2 wavelengths, right? And that's what they meet when it comes to the fight game. The UFC seems to find that balance of, you know, respecting the talent versus you got to show me something to get those fans up off the seat. So when you hear us saying that this was, a really good performance and dominating, I think we also understand where you guys are coming from. If you paid money and you wanted to see what was advertised as supposed to be a fun striking match, I get the boos. You know what I mean? At the same time.
Yeah, that's true. I was expecting a lot more from the striking, but all right.
And you just never know. Maybe Cory doesn't get the fight. This injury, he said surgery this week in his Instagram post. Marab's hurt, Cejudo's hurt. So who knows what happens here ultimately? I mean, obviously not rooting for anyone one way or the other. We try to keep it unbiased, but for the health of the division, it seems like Sean O'Malley winning the title in a couple of weeks is probably the UFC's best case outcome. And I'm sure they'd love him to kind of go to that next level of star power. So we'll see how it plays out.
All right, let's move on, guys. In the co-main event at UFC on ESPN 50, Tatiana Suarez submitted Jessica Andrade. Striking, wrestling, eventually BJJ, all on point. Suarez put it all on display as she finished the former strawweight champion via guillotine choke. All right, so what's next for Tatiana Suarez? She's got options, guys. We know Zhang Weili faces Amanda Lemos at UFC 292, same card as Sterling and O'Malley. So just so you know what the timeline is, neither Sandhagen, if healthy, or Suarez could even be a sub or anything like that. But we know that they're definitely in the mix. All right, Nolan, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, she looked great. I think Tatiana Suarez has made her mark on this division for a long time, but being able to see her do it consistently and really do it at the highest level in this division is even, more fantastic to see. We've had 2 fights in a row that have gone off without a blip, without an injury, without a long layoff. Very nice to see. She's looked very good. And talk about the ability to stick, to continue on that trajectory. I think that's something that's super underrated in this picture, is the fact that she has been able to maintain her skill set through a lot of adversity. And I know that was something even before she got to the UFC, she battled a lot of adversity as well with her health. So she clearly has that instilled in her. She has a certain mentality that I think is rare. It's unique. It's elite. And this is going to bode well for her going forward. She's set herself up very well in this division. I think that she could be the next one in line perhaps, but we'll have to see about that. And yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good things. I think the UFC, she's become exactly what they want.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mike, how about you? Set a timeline for what you'd like to see next from Tatiana Suarez.
I guess it depends on how the title fight plays out in a couple weeks, right? Like, you could definitely put her in a title shot right now, and I don't think many of us would complain. I think a lot of people would be excited for it, but we know how big of a deal the UFC thinks Zhang Weili is, because she represents that huge Chinese market for them. And if she loses the belt, I could very much see them doing an immediate rematch with Lemos. If she wins, Yan Xiaonan is there as well and very much deserving of a title shot. And I know Dana White had already kind of mentioned they were talking about trying to maybe do that fight in China at some point. So if they could pull that off, I think they would go that direction over Tatiana, just because it would be such a big deal to have a Chinese champion versus a Chinese contender in China. But if that doesn't work out, I think you could go to Tatiana at any point here and she would be worthy and exciting. I'm curious to see her against like a high level technical striker like a Zhang Weili, like Yan Xiaonan. Pity that Rose Namajunas is gone from the division, because I think that would have been an extremely interesting matchup with her and Tatiana. But yeah, she seems like she's filling the potential that we all said. There was the jokes about female Habib, all that stuff early on, and she really is kind of evolving into a dominant force of her own. So I think now we can talk about her in the context. She came back. She won the fight. She returned to the division that she's at, won again. The momentum is there. If she can stay healthy, maybe get one more, or go right into that title shot. She's right there. So everything looks very positive for her in the near-term future and the long-term future.
And I will say, I just want to add one thing in here. About 2 weeks ago, I started to kind of hear some stuff about a potential Q4 event in Shanghai, that they're starting to kind of put some feelers out to some of the fighters from that region. So maybe the UFC, maybe Mike's on the money there with the China versus China thing. Maybe they're just waiting for Zhang Weili's fight here coming up in a couple of weeks to really lock it in. But again, some of the fighters in that region have been kind of told, like, you might want to wait a little bit to fight, because we got something in the works.
Mm-hmm. All right, and let's get some thoughts from Fada on this topic.
Yeah, I like that she went back to strawweight. It seems like that's her focus, because I think the path to the title is a lot clearer for her at strawweight. The only thing standing in the way is Yan Xiaonan, and now they're talking. Nolan just mentioned the potential card in the fourth quarter. She could fight Yan Xiaonan as a number one contender fight. Now, you do eliminate a contender by doing that, but again, it depends on how Zhang Weili and Amanda Lemos plays out, barring any injuries or the way the fight plays out or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, because 125, we still, with Alexa Grasso upsetting Valentina Shevchenko, we've got the rematch coming up, and then you've got Manon Fiorot, who would have normally probably gotten a title shot. We got Aaron Blanchfield, who's super exciting in the division, Tyler Santos. So I think her return to 115 was perfect. And she said she thinks she deserves a title shot. I mean, she'd be open to Yan Xiaonan, but she thinks that the title shot is probably what she deserves next. But yeah, I think she's right.
Okay. Potter, I was actually going to push back on that, man. I thought she has more of an open road at flyweight because she's got that win over Grasso. Granted, it was a flyweight win, and Grasso's got a huge task ahead of her going against Valentina Shevchenko, who she beat, but she was also struggling in that fight prior to getting the takedown and the submission. But then you threw those names. Holy cow. Fiorot, I know I didn't say it as good as you. Blanchfield, yeah, man. There are some killers at flyweight, so I'll hang back on that one. But man, Tatiana Suarez has options, that's for sure. We got to give her that. All right, moving on here. Let's give some love to some of the fighters that didn't get booed. All right, I know there's some booing going on in the main event, but earlier in the night, Music City fans were popping throughout the night. Quite a few athletes handled their business, made a splash. Sometimes they just don't get the headlines. Let's give them some love. Who delivered your under-the-radar performance from this past weekend? Mike, you lead off.
Yeah, so I watched this card like best I could, right? Well, at the Jake Paul Nate Diaz fight, but thankfully they had some ball and Wi-Fi on press row, so I was able to stream this thing on ESPN Plus and watch it. And I think there's some obvious ones on the main card which really provided like the best finishes. But if you want to go to the prelims, I think Cody Durden is a guy that deserves a little bit of a shout out. 4 wins in a row, which is in the flyweight division, now tied for the longest winning streak with Pantoja and Muhammad Wakayev and some of these dudes. So we're always looking for fresh blood at flyweight, right? Like it's being backlogged for so long with those 4 rematches and other rematches and title changes and stuff. So anyone who can kind of make their name out there and get a 4-fight winning streak like Durden has is good in my books. I know he's still rubbed some people along the wrong way for like some shitty stuff he's said and tweeted early in his UFC career, but he's continuing to put some distance behind himself in that and getting the job done in the octagon. So I guess shout out to him, and I guess you could make an argument that probably should have got fight of the night too, but they went in the performance of the night direction. So bad for Cody Durden, but the winning streak is good.
All right, Fada, how about you? Under the radar, who was yours?
I'm going to go with Diego Lopez because he came in his UFC debut short notice against Movsar Evloev. You never want to be known as the guy that puts on a good performance and lost. It was an incredible performance regardless because he pushed an unbeaten, highly touted prospect to the brink that we didn't think. And maybe not I shouldn't say to the brink, but he threatened a lot in that fight and people were impressed. But it's always, what is he going to do after? And to come out and have a quick submission like that was incredible because I saw a lot of people tweeting about him and being super excited to see what he was going to do. So he had that momentum, and had he lost or just not looked impressive at all, I think that little star that he's building would have dimmed. So it was nice to see him go out there and get a quick submission win. Obviously, the coach of Alexa Grasso, who won the title by submission. So all of this has just helped build his brand a lot, and it's nice to see. It's nice to see him finally get his shine. He's fought a lot on the regional scene, and to get his opportunity, he lost, of course, on the Contender series, didn't get the contract, and to come out and do that kind of reminds me when Lando Venata came on short notice and gave Tony Ferguson that fight. So he kind of did that with Movsar Evloev, and then to get a quick submission over Gavin Tucker was really cool to see. And it's cool to see how many fans are behind him. I think he's going to have I'm sure, I didn't track his social media or anything, but I'm sure he's probably increased a lot of followers after that performance.
Also an excellent choice. All right, we got Durden so far and Lopez. How about you, Nolan King?
Yeah, those were the 2 right answers. Durden, big career turnaround, and Diego Lopez, superstar potential there. But for me, just to shine some light on somebody else too that I think we could throw into this conversation would be Sean Woodson. He is a absolute challenge to fight, I think, really for anybody in that division. His stature, his size, the way he moves for a guy that's that long too. Just a really, really tricky matchup, I think, for a lot of people. The record shows that they're struggling to figure him out, right? You don't come across a guy that's that tall and that long in that division. And Dennis Bazooka taking that fight on short notice, having an awful weight cut in your UFC debut after you've been trying to get in for so long, and then you get in there and you're fighting a guy that's just like an absolute puzzle. I think it really speaks to the challenges that Sean Woodson provides. And I think he hasn't been able to stay consistent. He's been hurt. He's been out. So hopefully if he's a guy that can get in like 3 fights in a calendar year, we start to see him kind of make that trajectory towards fighting some of the better fighters in the division. Right now, he's just kind of been stuck in that, lower prelim level, but I think it's because we just really haven't seen him enough. So I'm interested to see how far his style and the challenges that he presents will take him. But hopefully they give him a little bit of a step up for his next fight.
Man, this whole time I kept saying, don't take mine, don't take mine, don't take mine. And none of you did, but stupid Pro Fights Info in the chat took mine. Dustin Jacoby, I just wanted to give him a shout out. Man, I thought he had his hands full with Kennedy and Chuck Wu. Kennedy and Chuck Wu's a big cat. He uses his range. He does have slow starts. We know that. But also, if he gets his hands on you, man, it could be just lights out in terms of giving you a nap. But Dustin Jacoby got after him. I did think it got stopped, a tad early, but I'll give the credit to Pro Fights Info there in the chat room. Folks, I see you guys. Sean Johnson, you tried to do an emoji, kind of struck out. There's a crazy duck in the chat. I'm trying to get to YouTube, but you keep referencing other fights that we're just not talking about. He did say Tatiana versus Fern. I was like, what? I think he's talking about Verna Jandarova. Maybe that might be a good one there.
Yeah, okay, Dern, I think.
Or Dern, yeah. Maybe meant Dern, but he wrote Fern, and that threw me off. Okay. Yeah, those would be good ones. All right, well, we got to move on. Dana White Contender Series is back. We're on the 7th season, the 57th episode, and they're going to start off a little bit early, all right? So I'm going to give you the time each week, but it's 7 p.m. Eastern, and it's on ESPN Plus, and it goes tomorrow. Guys, just how big of a franchise is this now in the MMA world? I mean, I was kind of talking with you guys on our other channels. I feel like it's UFC pay-per-views and then tentpole events for Bellator and maybe playoffs and finals for PFL. But geez, how is the Dana White Contender Series kind of almost not up there in terms of the appeal to an MMA hardcore like myself or the fans that tune into a show like this? Fada, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, somebody had posted, I keep referencing people posting stuff on social media. Somebody had posted that card of Dana White Contender Series that featured Jamal Hill. It had Woodson and Terrence McKinney, Billy Quarantillo, all on the same night. So that should just tell you the kind of talent that it produces. And as we look ahead to this season, one of the main events, the standout for me, George Hardwick and I don't know if it's a main event, maybe Nolan can correct me there, but George Hardwick and Abdelkarim Salouadi, those are two guys that could be in the UFC right now. So that kind of just speaks to the talent that comes on to the show, and fast pace, entertaining fights. I love that it's an hour earlier because then I get to sleep an hour earlier. But I just, it's a different concept than the Ultimate Fighter for a lot of those guys that don't want to go through the show. I know a lot of people complain about the Ultimate Fighter. The only difference is some of these guys don't get their story told the same way that they would on the Ultimate Fighter. They may not get that same exposure. Some of them do. They do these great features. But at the end of the day, it's all about the fights. It's fast-paced, back-to-back. It's a lot of fun, and some really seriously great talent comes out of that show. So I like it.
Yeah, Nolan, I know this is one of your favorite times of the year, this 10-week, 8-week run that we have usually in the summer, fall. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm excited for it to come back. We've seen the show evolve. I think it's come a long way. Obviously, the appeal's been there, I think, for a while because of the fact that it's pretty pure product. It's 5 fights. There's not a lot of fluff. Sure, there's a video package in between each thing, but it's kind of you're in and you're out, right? You don't have to sit around for 6 hours and commit. You can just tune in. It's almost like watching a HBO series. You know what's going to happen, pretty much when it's going to end, and you're not going to have your whole night taken up. So I think it's great. It was a perfect evolution in time from The Ultimate Fighter. And I'm excited for this season, man. I think the show has turned from taking very talent that was very green or kind of on the cusp of being green and being a little more established and figuring out who was who there. And now it seems like, they're putting guys on here that honestly are way too good by season 1 or season 2 or season 3 standards to be on the show. Like Farrah mentioned, fighters like George Hardwick. There's a guy named Vinicius de Oliveira on this year. Those guys are super good. I think they would probably beat half of their divisions right now in the UFC. But this has become the way that the UFC brings talent in. It's just the reality of the situation. They see an ability to build these guys before they even get in. And so there's every year the talent seems to get better and better. And I think this year is no different there.
All right, Mike Bond, I know you love you some DWCS as well. Let me give you something else because you're the stats guy. You always have such an incredible memory of what goes on in our sport. Without the layup, that's Sean O'Malley. Who do you think's the next possible champion that this series could crown, I guess? We know Jamal Hill was the first one to come out of Dana White Contender Series. I don't know. Do you have one in mind that you've been tracking? That because it's an impressive alumni they have.
I don't know, man. I almost wanted to defer that one to Nolan. I wasn't necessarily prepared for that one. I wanted my layup of Sean O'Malley, so he's got to be the one, I guess. But technically, Jamal Hill, is he still a champion? So can we go him as the 2-time champ when he comes back from this Achilles injury, or how does that work? Either way, I'm excited for this. I think it adds a nice fill-in of fights during the midweek, and I think it shows interest on our side from like a traffic perspective. You get to hear from Dana White each week. Sometimes that makes news. So I think all in all, like it's an enjoyable thing. So I'm looking forward to it. And I will wrap up my comment there because I know we have the weigh-ins coming up in a matter of minutes.
We do have the weigh-ins. We do have the weigh-ins coming up, folks. So straight from us, we'll go to the weigh-ins. Fada, go ahead. What are your thoughts here? We'll clean things up here in a minute or two.
No, I said I thought I'll throw some names out of top of my memory. I don't know if they'll maybe become future champions, but they're very close. Tyler Santos, Grant Dawson's on the rise. We've got Jeff Neal. I know he lost to Shafkat, but he's still legit. Who else? Yeah, I think those are some names that stand out from the show.
Nolan, you got some names?
Greg Hardy, obviously. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, you guys touched on them. I think it's we're at the point now where the guys that are up at the top, right, are the season 1 sort of season 2. So we'll see what comes from after that. I mean, Bo Nickel's just like the absolute, perfect Contender Series person. So that's a good shout right there. I don't necessarily see that sort of person on this season. For anybody that's curious, like there's no Raul Rosas or a Bo Nickel that's just got that real X factor. But I think there's going to be a lot of really solid, just good fighters on this year.
Mike, what was the name you threw out?
Bo Nickel.
Bo Nickel. Okay, sorry. It got muffled a little bit. Jailton Almeida, I guess, would be mine. I think he came through a Brazil one or something like that. And I know you guys don't think I can do it, but I'm telling you I can do it because the weigh-ins start at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. We're going to throw it straight to them. Real quick, Nick Diaz versus a Paul brother. Just give me this. You into it or not, guys?
2 thumbs down.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Nick. We tried, man.
Down.
We tried, Nick. How about
would
boxing?
Would I watch it? We're a prisoner to our own interest in MMA.
Real quick, here's the other additional. Who won, boxing or MMA? Mike, who won on Saturday, boxing or MMA?
Neither. It doesn't matter.
All right, Fada.
I guess boxing, numbers wise.
Nolan.
Yeah, boxing.
All right,
I think it's a competition.
Influencer boxing.
We all won.
Low-level celebrity boxing, I think is what I call it. Folks, you can tune in for the next 10 weeks or so. We're going to go 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific for Spinning Back Clique. We do this every week. Usually it's an hour later. So if you're just tuning in now, sorry, we probably could have got the word out a little bit more, but it's a last-minute decision. Why? Because we're going to turn it over to the UFC weigh-ins. That's starting up here in a second. Hit the like and subscribe, folks, please, because the more you do that, the more this thing turns over and starts to get out there to more of you. I know there's a lot of you that tuned in for the first time, maybe even through Facebook, that you're going, man, where was this in my life? Well, here we've been for the last couple of years. So do that for us, won't you? Thank you to the crew and Goes behind the scenes. He knocked it out of the park as well as our producer. All right, folks. See you next week here on Spinning Back Clique. Go out and be a champion. Stay here for the UFC Dana White Contender Series weigh-ins. They're coming up in 30 seconds.